Hello, welcome back to Vizru's walkthrough series. My name is Ben, once again, here with my co-host Milan. And today we have Justin, who's a product manager here at Vizru, once again back with us. Thank you for joining, Justin. And he'll be taking us through the process of how to create a workflow and the basic pieces of that workflow if you're just getting started. So Justin, we'll hand it over to you and you can take it away.
Yeah, so hey guys, I'm going to show you the basic of Vizru workflows. A workflow can be thought of as a function that is, there's an input, there are a set of instructions that act on that input, and then there's some kind of an output, right? So workflow is really the brain of the Vizru applications, where the business logic is written. Workflows can be nested inside one another, meaning you can have a parent workflow that calls a child workflow, and you can even use workflows as an API endpoint for others to use. So today I'll show you some commonly used blocks with explanations on how to use them. We'll cover the get parameters, conditional, set variable, and the SendMail block. Okay, so now once we're logged into Vizru, we can navigate to the workflow section. Down here in the gear icon, we'll click that and select Manage Stencils. Okay, and we can see these are all the workflows created in this particular tenant. So if we wanted to create a new workflow, all we'll have to do is click the Add button on the bottom right. Okay, so now we have a blank workflow. We'll go ahead and name it. Okay, so I named my workflow JC test, and then the blocks we'll use today are located in the action section in the left nav here. As you can see, there are many other categories, but we'll get into those other ones at a later time. Okay, so our very first block in the workflow will be a get parameters block. It's located right here. So if we click on that, that block is automatically added to our workflow. And the workflow needs a starting point, right? So the get parameters is a block to use to let the system know where you would like to start. Typically, you would not have a get parameters block anywhere other than the start of the workflow. Okay.
So I guess along that same vein, is the get parameter block always going to be the first one? So will all workflows have get parameter in the beginning, or is that just, usually just where you're finding the get parameters block, if that makes sense?
So it depends on how the workflow is being called. Okay. If you were calling the workflow internally within Vizru, so let's say that you have a button on the front end somewhere in the UI, and you click on it, and that runs a workflow, then you would use the get parameters. If you were calling the block outside of Vizru, let's say that this workflow was set up as an API endpoint, right? Then we would either use the post, the generic post,
okay.
Or where is it? Or the generic get.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, but typically I would say, 90% of the time, you'd use the get parameters as your starting point.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so now let's bring in set variable block. So this is the set variable block, and we can bring it in. Now to connect two blocks together, all you have to do is use the connector from the source block and then drag it to your target block. To disconnect two blocks, we simply remove the connection, like so. You can also use this plus button right here to actually add a new block, and it does that connection automatically. So if we click here, we get the same view as in the left nav, and then we can find our set variable, and we can see that it gets connected automatically, okay? To delete a block, all we have to do is hover over a block and then hit the trash can icon to delete. It'll say, are you sure you want to delete? And we'll say, okay. Okay, now we have our two blocks in the workflow. We'll go ahead and save. Okay, so we have our starting point and we have a set variable. If we click into the set variable, we can start defining key value pairs. Okay, so I'll define a variable called message, and it will store hello world. Okay, we'll go ahead and save. Okay. Now, if you want to run this workflow, let's get into the settings and make sure that the workflow log is enabled. So the settings are right here. And we'll have to click this button to enable the workflow log, which we'll see in a second. Okay, great. Now, once that's enabled, let's hit test. Now here, you can define your inputs into the workflow. And since this workflow doesn't depend on any input at this moment, we could leave this empty. Okay, so by clicking send, we'll see that the workflow executed, and we can click on the log ID to view what happened. Okay, so now we're in debugger mode. On the bottom left, you're able to see details about the workflow, like who ran it, what the status was, when it was executed, when it was finished, etc. To the right of that, in this area, is the output from each block, right? So we can see that our output is empty in the get parameters since we didn't pass in any parameters, right? So that was expected. If we hit this right arrow here, we can see the message that I defined, right? In the set variable block, message is hello world, right? So that's easy enough.
Very cool. So the debugger also, that I could see that would be used as troubleshooting tools, right? As well, correct?
Absolutely correct. Yes.
Perfect. That's very helpful.
And say if you had several workflows running at the same time, does the debugger display it for each of them, or do you have to go view them individually?
So typically what you would see is in the workflow, it would stop at your child workflow, and then you'd have to find that child workflow, look into that log, and then see exactly, okay, what is happening, where was the bug. If it's in another child workflow, you'd have to go find that one and do the same.
I understand. Okay.
Cool. So let's do something similar, except this time we'll give the hello message as an input into the get parameters, and then we'll set the set variable will reference the get parameters block. Okay, so if we click this X, we'll get out of debugger mode. So now we want to label the get parameters block. Okay, so let's label it entry. Oops, and we'll save. Okay. Okay, now here in the get parameters, it's very much like object-oriented programming where you can reference data inside of objects, right? So the syntax we'll use are curly brackets. So these curly brackets. And then inside, we'll first name the object or the block entry in this case, followed by period. Okay, and then we want to pull the variable we want to reference out of that block, which is going to be message. Okay, we'll save and close. Save, and we'll test again, except this time we'll pass in a parameter called message, and we'll call it hello world. Okay, we'll see what that did. Okay, now we see in the get parameters block, we have a variable defined as message that has hello world, and the set variable block is taking that exact same message and storing it in this message variable.
Okay, so I'm just trying to understand what's the benefit of having it now in the get parameters as opposed to now just after the get parameters at the set variable stage?
So anything that you want to pull from your entry block, you would reassign it to another variable inside the set variable block. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Cool. So let's do something with a conditional block. Let's do something a little different here where we'll check an age, right? We'll check if an incoming age is greater than equal to 21. So in the action section, we'll go ahead and pull conditional block. Okay, so we have our conditional block and we set set variables to it. If the condition is true, then we'll go ahead and set a variable called flag equal to true. Okay, if the condition is false, we'll go ahead and set a flag equal to false. Now we want to start writing the condition itself. So if we click in the conditional block, we have our label, description, and condition. So in the condition, this is where we're going to check, right, if our incoming age is greater than or equal to 21. So we could say entry.age, and then we could say greater than or equal to 21. Just as a side note, some of the typical operators that are used are equals. So double equals, meaning strictly equal to, right? We have greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. We have the AND operator, which is 2 ampersands. This is used when you have two conditions that you want to check at once. And if both conditions are true, then the condition will evaluate to be true. We have the OR operator, which is 2 vertical lines like this. Now with the OR operator, again, 2 conditions, and only one needs to be true for the whole statement to evaluate to true. And then I'll show an example of the AND operator pretty soon here. Okay, and typically with our conditionals, we like to give it a label so that we can read it right in the workflow itself without having to guess what this block does. So we'll say age is greater than or equal to 21. Okay, great. So now we'll save and close. Make sure to save our workflow, okay? And we'll say age is 25. Okay, if we send and view the log, we see that, okay, our get parameters has a variable called age, that's 25. We go next. We'll take a look at our condition. So this is our condition. These are the values. So 21, right, is what we're looking for. And sorry, the age is what we're looking for. This 21 is static. So entry.age is 25. And of course, our result is true. And so we come here to our next block and our flag is true. If our age was maybe 18, obviously that would fail a condition, and down here we would have the flag equal to false. Okay, so now let's add another condition using the AND operator. So we'll say we want the person's age to be greater than 21, and we want their driver's license to be valid. Okay, so we'll have a variable called valid license, and we'll say that has to be equal to true. Okay. So now in this conditional statement, it'll look at 2 things. It'll first check if the person's age is greater than or equal to 21, and then it'll check if valid license is true. If both of these are true, then the statement will evaluate to true. And I forgot the, there we go, entry.valid license. Okay, we'll save and we'll do another run. Okay, we'll say the age is 24. And then valid license is true, okay? So we hit send and see what happened. Of course, it evaluated to true. So these are 2 variables. It went into the conditional block. Since both of these are true, then the whole statement is true. So we take this yes path and our flag is true, okay?
Gotcha. So right now you have your set variable or the condition resulting based off of what's going in through entry, which is why you had entry dot age and then entry dot valid license. So like let's say you could theoretically have it attached to a form, right? So based off of what you submit in the form, it could execute a workflow based off of that get parameter condition if it's taking it directly from the form.
Exactly. So we actually
Okay.
have different actions that you can take with the form. So when you open up a form in Vizru, you can, right when you click open on the form, you can run a workflow first, have that execute, and hide certain fields, pre-populate certain fields, things of that nature before. So you can run a workflow before the form is actually rendered to customize it. Maybe it's based on user role in the system or something similar. We also have, when you click save on a form, you can also execute a workflow. So let's say that you're a user and you are interacting with the form and you type in your data points. Okay, great, and you'll hit save. If you require to take further action on the data that was inputted, then you can connect a workflow to the form after save.
Okay. It gives you a lot of options to work with to just automate everything.
Right. So suppose if the person is over 21 and has a valid driver's license, we wanted to send them a special offer through email, as an example. So then we can come over here to our SendMail block, and we'll bring that in. Okay, we'll connect it, and then if we click inside the SendMail block, first you'll notice that we have two tabs, right? First, block settings and then the connection mapping. So for certain blocks, we'll have what is called a connection mapping where the key value pairs are defined. Okay, so in the connection mapping, here is all the typical fields that you would want while sending an email, right? Who it was from, ability to provide aliases, who the recipient is, the subject, BCC, CC. You can even attach files. But to attach a file, we'll have to actually introduce a new block, which we'll cover later. And then ultimately our email content, right? So this works great if you have an email template, because then the workflow can actually pull the email template in, dynamically fill the content that's specific to that person, like their name or any other personal identifiers. Okay, so suppose that the inputs into this workflow already had all of the information from the from name, email, to subject, etc. So we can simply fill all this out and say entry.from. Alias, entry.to.
Just a quick question as you're going through this. What exactly the alias, what is that? Just kind of a basic understanding.
Sure, so an alias is essentially masking what the real value is. So for example, by default, this mail will show that it came from noreply@vizru.com. If you wanted to actually show that, oh, it came from Justin@vizru.com, we can give the email an alias, and instead of showing from noreply@vizru, it'll then show this email came from Justin@vizru.
Okay, that makes sense. That's pretty straightforward. Yep, thank you.
No problem. So entry.cc, maybe we'll say entry.content. Right, now once this is set, and let's say, suppose that you had a larger process in play, right, that did a whole bunch of rules, ultimately came down to this workflow to do this check if the age is greater than 21 and the driver's license is true. We could reuse this workflow in a bunch of areas, provided that it has all the correct inputs, where it's going, where it's from, the subject, what the content is. This workflow can be reused many, many times to actually send your email out.
So perfect. That wraps us up for today. Thanks again to Justin for walking us through the intro to the workflow using Vizru. And that's all from Milan and I today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, guys.